Thank you all for attending this little fireside chat. There's actually no fireside. I guess that's why it's a little bit cold here, right? So I'm delighted to have to share the stage with Bhawna, actually to give you a stage, because this is really about you.
We shared yesterday too, maybe not at the same time, but the same stage.
And maybe we can start with, I think you sharing with the audience who you are, what you do at Okta.
Got it. I'm the CTO at Okta. That just got announced. But I lead engineering that helps build applications, which includes authentication, authorization for all consumer, all B2B applications. Additionally, we also do a new product called fine-grained authorization, which is both on open source as well as paid version. Where if you are trying to control what access you want to any kind of application or data, you can control that at a very fine-grained level. And then we just talked about yesterday at the keynote, which is Auth for GenAI platform. Primarily, if you're building GenAI application or AI agents, that's another platform. So my team works on all of that. It's an enterprise SaaS setup. So if you are working on a login, behind the scene for most applications, we are helping make sure it's secure, make sure it's well done and frictionless.
Yeah, that's.
And we leverage Datadog heavily.
Thank you for that. So maybe I want to spend some time on a concept that's very central to who we are as humans, but also central to your business, which is that of identity.
Mm-hmm.
It's obviously what makes Okta known for what it is. And I'd say, up until very recently, identity was very much something tied to who we are, and to a real user, like in the flesh. And even to some extent, I'd say, even when we deploy service accounts to act, it's usually on the behalf of someone like you, like me, And now, I think that view is somewhat challenged in the world of AI. So I think I'd love to understand, how we should think about identity when actions taken are not necessarily prompted by someone, but prompted by something now that almost has its own volition.
Yeah, that's a very, very good question, Alexis. I would say, or machine-to-machine identity existed. We have worked that. API to API also existed. The change here is that there's now an agent technology or GenAI application which is running autonomously, but also making decisions autonomously. So it's the prediction of what we used to run is different now, because the outcome could be different based on what the prompt is, what the data is, what the context is, and what it's running in. So that shifts how you secure it, what context you're providing, and how you control that context. So certainly that shifts how identity is working. Number one thing, of course, is extending a user's identity to multiple agents. Now you have multiple agents that's running my identity or using my user information to do different things. So how do you secure that? That's one shift that certainly we are evaluating and bringing in our platform. The second part is now you have API to API calls, where do you store those access tokens? And something that very commonly I see in many applications or many people who are building is they store secret key right there. And if they are demoing, it will be open on the screen, say, okay, don't look at it, I'm going to copy it. It's like, how do you solve for those things? And our platform certainly enables that as well. And lastly, I would call out with the agent technology that shifts is data. What data and how much access? It cannot be that all data has access, your agent has access to all data. So that shifts how technology provides access. That's why fine-grained authorization is something that we talk about, and we're building it to enable more for a GenAI application and agent application. But those things shifts the AI agent way of working, or you can say identity way of working. And I think something we talked about when we were talking about scale is the biggest thing. Now it's not one user in multiple format, in multiple contexts. So scale is the big shift for identity as well.
Okay, and so, I think, I certainly have at times written a password or a secret in a file and, because I needed to be there. And that was already to some extent, I think, a difficult problem for us as an industry to deal with. Secret management, which underpins usually identity. So we've had blind spots then. Now, what you're saying is the scale is going to be potentially orders of magnitude more than what we have now. So how do we deal with it? Like, how can you help us, I guess, not make the rookie mistakes, scale with some, assurance, peace of mind?
Mm-hmm. Well, as we are talking about this space, number one, I think we also talked about in our keynote, which is security. So having a strong identity platform that's connecting all of your identity of the user to the agent and the whole life cycle, absolutely must have. You can't drop that, that connection, because if you do, then you cannot trace your agents. So number one, having strong identity platform that can authenticate, authorize, make sure you're not copying your secrets in the file. You just admitted something very basic in front of a very big group. And then, so that's why token vault is something that's part of our out-of-the-box platform. And then, of course, the other thing that we talked about, which is the behind the scenes. So if agent is doing something and you have created some guardrails, right? So they might need a user's approval, user's confirmation. So how do you do that async approval? So those are all the capabilities that needs to be there. So that's one. A strong identity platform can provide you that. Number two, observability, monitoring, tracking. So if you have a full life cycle of agent built into the identity, how do you track and monitor? Absolutely must have. And then alert, because if you have a prompt or let's say a context that shifts the outcome, there should be an alert to say now it would plan to do this was the goal, but that the outcome is not. So that's the anomaly, or making sure that we keep it secure. So that alert also needs to be there. And lastly, I think guardrails. There's a lot of guardrails that's missing. Mm-hmm. Guardrails around what data needs to be used, what should be the protection around it, what should be done around certain policy of a company, and different company have different security risk appetite, let's say, right? So guardrails are certainly important, which could be policy guardrail or anything else. But those guardrails need to be there. And scaling is just a basic. I would call it a performance table stake, even in the new world.
Okay. And those guardrails, can you help us with that? I mean, I think because as I think, so a year or two from now, there's potentially a world where we have, one person has tens of agents running around doing a bunch of things left and right. In the name of that person, let's say in my name, what should I ensure now? What guardrails do I need to put in place to not have to realize that, oops, well, yes, this agent did something wrong, but it has my name on it and has my permissions on it. Well, luckily, as a CTO, I have no permissions whatsoever. But how should I think about it? Like, what do I need to ask our identity providers, tell the teams, you need to think about A, B, and C in terms of guardrails before you can release? Or do I just tell the team, let's say the Datadog teams, just go ahead, try it out, and then we'll fix it as it goes. Do we have that luxury, I guess, in that new world, or no?
Well, the basic principles of security, privacy, compliance doesn't shift, right? We still have the principle of, least trust, or the control of defense in depth, or least privilege. That doesn't change. The unfortunate thing is, as the technology is new, the builders are building with, as much as possible because the tools and technologies aren't in place, right? Yeah. So definitely that's one aspect of guardrail, which is fine-tuning and making sure only the data that is must-have. And if it's a high-risk data, then what kind of other controls you need to have to make sure that you're not exposed, right? And that is also key to blast rate, controlling the blast radius. So that's number one. Your monitoring and tracking is absolute must, because if you don't have it, how do you go back and make sure that you're looking at what was said, what was done, and what was the outcome? Because the other very common thing we're talking about is, supply chain has been a very big issue, and for a very long time, it's not a new concept, but you still see supply chain vulnerabilities coming up and causing breaches, even today. We will see, we're talking about agent chaining. There will absolutely be agent chain attacks or vulnerability, and that is not part of the conversation. So that is another thing that we need to kind of keep track, as you're saying, 1 to 2 years. And then the other very key aspect, I know we are talking about scale, but many people are not talking about scale. For them, scale will come later. Right now, they're too busy building their own solution, you can say, or figuring out our experimentation. A lot of organizations, they build their, you can say, infrastructure based on the traffic pattern, right? So if it's North America, it's day. So you will see a rise in the morning and all of that. So we have that traffic pattern figured out, and that's how we optimize our infrastructure. Agent is going to change traffic pattern. They run 24/7. They run weekends all the time. So now we are looking forward to a very different traffic pattern for which we will have to build our infrastructure. That's going to be different. So there are a lot that will shift. I don't think we are talking about all of those things yet, but many of us are thinking about it and working towards it. Solutions are not there yet.
And maybe, so I think that this room is obviously full of folks who are intimately, comfortable with the technology, obviously are building it for their companies. How do they bring folks from legal compliance along, right? For whom agents may be just some hyped up word that they hear because that's what's in vogue right now, but that they struggle to relate to it, and they may, how can we have a productive conversation where, in both the builders, to some extent the internal regulators, auditors, and so on, can fit those guardrails, agree on those guardrails, and sort of anticipate potential problems that are going to arise.
I think GDPR was one when I bet you must have felt that legal heads were our new best friends. I think we will see the repeat of it, which is legal and security leaders will be our new best friends. And I bet you must have felt it when at least I had to for my organization, which is when we said, okay, we need to bring in code gen technology. That was a big, many months of back and forth and redlining. So yes, that will happen, but I also see the other way, which is it's a new technology, a lot of new, you can say, vulnerabilities or open spaces and licensing issues. So I see their point of view of why they are, call it nervous or overly conservative. So I actually respect that because, on the other side, as a technologist, I might want to run faster, but they keep me honest. But the way to do it is, how can you experiment in a controlled space, learn from it, and then figure out what could be your, you can say, vulnerabilities or open spaces, and then you plug them, and then walk them through, and then take that step. But the other thing I would also say and encourage people to think about is if your solution is low risk, and that is something that I educate my legal partners, is the solution or data I'm working on is low risk. Let's say the data I'm working on is public content. Then for me to run my GenAI capability and roll it out outside, the risk is lower. And I would say people are very forgiving of GenAI application when it hallucinates. They find it funny. So that's one, and then creating some guardrails to give them confidence that if something happens, we can fine tune very quickly to control or pull it back or whatever. So that's step one, which is how do you create your data low risk versus high risk? And then when you're high risk, you do want to go slow. You do want to go with your eyes wide open, is my take, and is of course their take. But that just gives you the ability to experiment with the technology, but also move fast in some places and move cautiously in some other places.
I see. Okay. And so let's say I'm rolling out a new agent. What data do I need to get, in terms of, I don't know, tracing, or you said supply chain. Like, what do you think constitutes the minimum sort of viable set of data that you need to have to feel good about? Yes, okay, that's fine. We have the framework that's needed to let this thing loose and see it in the wild as well?
Well, there are basic logs for sure, but I would call out a few more. Context information. So let me say this from an example. Let's say you have an application or agent application or ecosystem that does booking. And what it does is, in this period of time, get me the cheapest tickets, right? Now, as a logging, you also need to make sure that when someone's saying cheapest ticket, what's the time period, what's the context around, whatever information it takes in, the user information, users' behavior of tickets or travel or what matters to them. So these are all the context, which usually, if you run a regular application, you don't log all of that. But now this context matters. The metadata of the context, maybe not the full context, but metadata of that context matters because the agent is going to make decisions based on that. So that's a new thing. The second, I would say, as you are doing this booking and stack, there'll be multiple agents that's going to run. So who's authenticated, who's authorized, how long are they going to, because it's going to run behind the scene to run this booking capability or get your pricing stuff. So all of those sessions, when was the session active, when was the session not active, all of those information need to also be logged. And then the lastly, I would say evaluation. So now that the result is there, by the way, let's not forget prompt also needs to be logged. But let's say now the result is there, the ticket's booked or ticket's sent to you, that this is the ticket you should buy or bought, let's say. That evaluation of what the output was versus what the prompt was and what the guardrail was, that needs to be there because only then, actually, the monitoring traceability can say, wow, the outcome was, the guardrail was, let's say, don't go above 10K, but someone bought 50K ticket, some agent. That's a problem, let's fraud or alert or something. So those all three capabilities, just with an example. So I would say the log size are going to become bigger. Does that help Datadog?
Whatever helps customers helps us. Okay, now maybe this is, I'm assuming you have a vantage point that's quite privileged in terms of seeing the world that is probably to come. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious whether you have a particular anecdote that comes to mind in terms of seeing agents, trying to see agents in the wild, surprising behavior or scary behavior or something that made you laugh.
Well, I'll share one, and thankfully it was more of something, I was talking to a CAIO of a Fortune 100 company. And his team is experimenting with an AI agent solution where they want to configure their system through agents, and they want multiple agents to configure their system because that will help them launch their system faster to their customers. And he shared with me that they started the agents ecosystem to start running with the configuration with some metadata or some knowledge base, you can say. And after running it for a week, the agent themselves updated their knowledge base and enriched it. Now, he was happy doing it, but I was like scared. I was like, what? Because that's altering your knowledge, your information. So there's an aspect of joy where you could find how smart this agent's ecosystem was to educate itself and learn from it and get better. And there's an aspect of worrisome because how do you track and monitor and supervise to make sure that they are not adding a knowledge base that takes them out of bounds or out of control, you can say, right? I'm a sci-fi fan. I know many people quote Terminator. I can quote many other movies, but after that example, we talked about Terminator for 5 minutes.
Okay. Or we should add the law of the robotics from Isaac Asimov, I guess.
Yeah.
And overall, the field is moving very fast. Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm subscribed to a few newsletters, and almost every other day, there's like, oh, there's this paper, it's changing completely the field, there's that paper, and so on. So how do you keep track of what's going on? And how deep can you go realistically with your schedule?
It's hard, but I would say that's one shift that has happened across, not just me, even overall engineering. If you remember, as leaders, we try to create the noise or control the noise or the context switch for our teams less so that they can focus on the work, they can focus on what needs to be delivered. In the new world of AI agent or Gen AI overall, it's shifted because now they are interested in keeping track of all of that. I want them to keep track of the evolution in this space. So we are seeing more context switching, but with code gen and other technologies, it's also helping them with that context switching. So there's a shift in the way of working. The truth is that, yes, it's hard to keep track of everything in depth, but I would say breadth is the way to go. And then if something makes sense, something is relevant, that's when you go deep, rather than going deep everywhere, because everything is evolving. If you remember, a year back, when the code gen technology started, they were saying that it helps you 25% or productivity improvement. 6 months back, it was 70%, although I will be honest and admit that we have not seen anything more than 20 or 15. So it's still to come, but if I go deeper into everything, then it's just a waste of my time and a lot of noise. So it's more of like keeping track of the breadth, and then if something is relevant, just going deep. That's my way.
Okay, so I don't feel bad when I just skim the first paragraph of that newsletter. Okay.
Or you copy paste, put it in your Gen AI application, and say summarize.
Okay, that's a good point. And now in that body of knowledge, there's, and I compare it to the sort of pre-AI time, there's sort of what the science, if you will, the new techniques and that are explained, and then there's what people do with, let's say, nefarious intent to these systems. And I'm curious about that, adversaries. How has your thinking changed in terms of how you think about adversaries that are trying to exploit weaknesses in this new class of systems, which we know relatively little?
Absolutely, and our working in this space, identity and security space, I think we want to stay ahead of it as well. So as we are, fake videos is something that's become very common. So how, as humans, we react to news, which just because there's a video of someone doesn't mean that's what we need to react. So as human as well, our social space for us, we are also evolving ourselves. So similarly in the space of security as well, like I said, agent chaining, that's certainly something, API to API calls, we are building capabilities there. How do you have the identity for the full life cycle of an agent? Now, usually you see identity as one person or one user doing something at the time. One very common fraud detection is that the same user cannot log in within certain period for a certain time, right? That's a very, very common fraud detection rule. That will change because now, if you're enabling authenticated agents to operate and run, that rule will not apply, right? So many of our rules and guardrails will shift based on the space that we are operating. The non-human identity is also shifting in how it will work. For a very long time, non-human identity did not have a good solution. More so, just in time for that is also very different. You would say security overall is more static space, which is once you get authenticated, you have your session goes away, then you create another session. It's a very static space. Now with agent, it's going to become very dynamic, very real time. So there's a lot of shifts in our space. Many of it we are actively working, and many of it we're actually looking to partner with other organizations. We are partnering with many organizations so we can understand their experiment before it goes into production.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's switch gears a little bit.
Yeah.
I think we're seeing a lot of adoption of coding agents, and I'd love to for you to share your experience at Okta.
I think I shared one.
And in terms of how much of a well, first of all, how transformative do you think it is? I think you said maybe 15-20%. So maybe curious of how you backed into that number, and then how much more from a process. How has it been? Sort of warm embrace, reluctance, all of the above. So I think looking back,
if I get a multiple choice with one multiple choice saying all of the above,
yeah.
I have a feeling that all of the above is the answer.
Okay.
So I'm going to go with all of the above. But just being natural and human. But I would say largely it has been exciting. And before it was even approved, most people wanted it, right? So I call that warm embrace. The expectations were high. And that's what I'm saying with the numbers that was getting coded externally. And I don't know, I would be curious about your experience on that as well, versus what the team saw. And it could be very dependent on the technology we adopted and all of that. But the expectations were high versus the value, and they were use cases based. So if we are doing migration, the value is much higher versus a new code development. So those are all the variety that we saw that changed, or you can say more grounded the understanding and the realization of it. Fast forward today, now there are more technologies, more evolution, more IDE generation, more chat, and all of those integration. So we are now evaluating a couple of the new products, and we will bring them in. So the goal is how can we keep getting better? But it's not just the code gen, it's how do we leverage that for PR or Jira creation or auto generation of some responses so that we can close tickets automatically. Those are all the variety of places, because the one misconception is that just because it's 15 or 20% productivity improvement for software engineers' time, software engineers not writing code 100% of the time, which is a very big misconception at all leadership level, which is, oh, you're getting 20% improvement, so like, what does that mean? Can you do 5 more projects? So that is the number one thing that as technology leaders, we have to educate everyone that engineers are not writing 100% code 100% of the time. So what else are we doing? Are they writing documentation, PR reviews, Jira ticketing, incident reports? So how do you make sure that we are bringing productivity or AI productivity across the board? Then you get the value add.
I see that. That makes sense. Have you, maybe you have had a conversation with people who are reluctant to adopt, and it could be because they've seen the sort of the invasion of slop and more content, and so they're like, oh, bad code. Now these machines are going to write bad code. I don't want to be part of that type of thing. And I'm curious if you had those conversations and whether you were able to shift their perspective at the very least.
I think I already answered all of the above, so I can take that answer back. But I will say, I'm not sure if they are, well, I would say those people are not at Okta anymore. Okay. And the one way I do want to call out is this is not about, okay, adopt AI or don't adopt AI. It's more about how do you adopt AI. And a very common other thing that I see is like, a junior engineer should be empowered to say that just because I have AI doesn't mean that I have a project, I'll drop it in AI and I'll copy the code. That's not the answer. Yes, it's very fast. But that's not the answer. If they want to take time and design it and try, give the first attempt and then use AI to improve, they should be totally empowered to do that, even if that means that it adds a few more days to the whole development. Because there's an aspect of their learning as well, right? Similarly, a senior engineer, seasoned engineer, if AI is giving them code, just because it has given them code doesn't mean they need to adopt. They can totally reject it, and they should be totally empowered to reject it, and use something else, or write their own code. So I think the empowerment is there on making decisions of whether do you leverage AI or not. So the idea of adopting AI is not that every time just whatever it says. So that training needs to come, and that education we did provide, which is you're empowered. The one thing we are asking is take a look, try it out, leverage it where it makes sense, leverage it where it doesn't make sense. And they do that. So that support, or you can say safe space, has to be there, which we have provided. And outside of that, I think the other education we have provided is the future of this space is definitely, the fear of jobs going away, right? So yes, there was that in terms of reluctance, but having that conversation to say, look, the future is AI is going to be here. Now, some jobs will shift, right? With every technology, you see some jobs shifting, some way of working shifting. AI will also shift. But if you don't start now to evolve with it, it will be too much of a gap, and then you become obsolete. So how do you start evolving right away as it's evolving itself? So that also opened up the mind to see, okay, that makes sense, and I'm going to leverage, and I'm going to do more and not less, right, in different ways. So those were the conversations we had early on that helped the teams kind of embrace it. And we also added recognition, games, hackathons that also help people kind of experiment a lot and get comfortable with it. Because at the end of the day, as human, I feel like when we are uncomfortable with something, that's when we are reluctant. When we start to kind of see it embedded in our day-to-day, then it's a different way of looking at it.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm curious whether you've started to see maybe the first sort of ideas or the seeds of change in terms of how we organize, how a software engineering organization is usually structured, whether because one way to think about it would be, well, everybody's, I'm not going to X% more productive, meaning they can write more code, and that's not only what they do, but but everything is also changed. Or do you think there's real changes afoot, and more than just our output will change, but the way we need to structure the teams, the size of the teams, the number of teams a particular manager has, things like that. I'm just curious or is it too early?
I think, so the few shifts in our organization that I can share certainly is one, for our new product, which is Okta GenAI, we created a dedicated org which has a different process of rollout, different environment to work in, and that allows them to move faster. And that was important both for new product rollout, but also GenAI space, because they want to experiment with different technologies. And for our enterprise setup, we want to take more time. We want to have more guardrails there. So they needed a different setup, especially if they are working with developers who are trying new technologies. They needed that space. So that's one change, which is a dedicated or different environment and setup. The other thing that also shifted is, a lot of time we see a lack of, you can say, internal productivity, or internal productivity becomes like just bring a code-gen technology and that's it. But we created an internal productivity team dedicated to think about how can we leverage AI to embed improved tools, technologies, or setup across the engineering lifecycle or development lifecycle. So they are looking into how to have ticket automation, ticket closing, PR analysis, and many other things. So now they're dedicated to leverage AI to solve these kind of steps in our development day to day. So that's another change that we brought in. And then the third change we brought in was recognition. How do we bring recognition for AI specific? So we always had recognition for innovative ideas, or we had always recognition for someone who was 10x for something. But we added a dedicated recognition for AI space as well, hackathon as well, dedicated to AI. Those were the shifts that helped with a lot of adoption and effectiveness, but also inspiration and innovation. So those shifts certainly came. There are some other shifts that we are talking about. It has not come into fruition yet, which is strategic shift. What does it mean for our deployment in terms of AI space? Does it change how SaaS is getting deployed or used? What does it mean for us to now call what is identity and non-human identity and agentic identity? Is there a definition, or is it blurry? So there are some other strategic shifts that are coming, or we are seeing some glimpses of it. We will see how that goes. And then agentic experience is another thing that now we are trying to bring, so we will be hiring for that, which is developer experience has been a common thing that we hired for in past and looked for and had a roadmap for. Now agentic experience is that's where MCP fits in and everything. So we have rolled out our beta version of MCP as well, but that is another dedicated stream that we want to create, which is what does it mean to have agent experience looking forward.
Okay, that makes sense. And I think zooming out a little bit, is there a bet you're making as a CTO of Okta that you think people underestimate right now, that you say, no, you strongly believe and maybe the current is against you, you're swimming sort of upstream?
Well, the overall, I feel like even before agent, identity still is something that comes as an afterthought when I see examples of many customers that we work with and the issues or pain they go through. I feel like you should have thought about identity as first thought. And the second one is personally, I find me as the only person talking about scale in too many rooms and talking about how agent behavior will shift many aspects of this. And just the enforcement of it. We talk about DDoS, we talk about fraud, but now 10x or 100x that. And now geo doesn't matter. I mean, there are many companies who have geo-based controls to say if any traffic comes from this geo, do this or that. That geo might not matter with agent space, or how do you regulate based on geo? So there's a lot of shifts that we will see where the boundaries or rules that we have created in current date, knowing humans, will be different once it's the agent that is taking the human's identity, but doing things, same thing, but the agent is doing. Because an agent can run from anywhere, even though the user is in certain geo or time of the day. So the boundaries and rules are going to shift meaningfully, and I do feel that bet needs to be taken by us, taken by Datadog, taken by many key companies to come together. And we are partnering with many organizations on that.
Okay. I mean, I have to say personally, I find it, what I'm hearing from you is I'm filled with a mix of excitement for what is to come, a tinge of fear for, all these little things that are going to run around doing things. And I'm still, obviously very focused on trying to understand, okay, what can we do that's going to be where we have a sense of we're able to understand or predict what's going to happen, right? Because I think what we've seen in with probably 3 years of experimentation at this point is that as we think of new ways to put guardrails, some clever folks and maybe at some point some clever agents figure out a way to work around the guardrails, just like, yeah. So it's an exciting job you have ahead of you.
And you, right? And I think the best part about this technology, which I love, and like you said, want to be cautious and worry and look forward to is the fact that it can educate itself. How do you work with something that can learn and educate itself and do things differently? I think that will be the key part of the future worry, if you ask me. Everything else, yes, technology can figure out and solve and create guardrails and all that. But this is a technology that will learn.
Very cool. Bhawna, anything in closing that you want to share with the audience?
Well, one thing I think we discussed, which is when there's unknown, that's when the fear comes. So it's understandable that there's fear, scare, something might happen and all of that. But as leaders and as engineers, I would say, it is our job to convert this unknown and fear aspect and educate our people who are reworking, who are not in technology space and maybe doesn't understand this space, and help them educate and see what the positive side of what this technology can do, how it can help, and how we can take care of this unknown part, control it maybe, and then open it slowly. So I do feel in this new world of AI agent space, technology, engineers, builders, leaders have a very key space or key role to play, which is about, we can put it all in the term called leadership. And our leadership is usually associated with a higher title, but I think all of technology people has to play that leadership role of educating, embracing, but in the right way, in an educated and informed way. That is certainly a key role to play, because the answer is not to stay reluctant and stay away.
Okay, that's very encouraging. I mean, I'm actually curious, maybe a quick show of hands of folks who are using, experimenting, Gen AI, coding agents, various tools. Okay,
amazing.
So
this is a great group.
Yeah,
Love
it's a good part of the group. So, Bhawna, thank you very much. I very much look forward to talking to you hopefully next year to see how things have changed, what we will have collectively learned and what you'll have learned and be able to share with this group.
And I want to put a plug into many exciting rollouts Datadog shared yesterday, which is going to come in very handy for us in the journey. Thank you.
Bhawna. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks so much.